Today's Art Talk will be our 34th Art Talk. We have an exciting plan for Art Talks this year. We're going to venture into some new mediums, methods, and movements, as well as revisit the periods that we talked about this past year. We're also going to try to do some more on-site Art Talk experiences, safe travel permitted. Looking forward to the year. Art Talks has ended up being kind of probably one of our most popular sessions during our town halls.
It was. In fact, when you guys went down to LA and did it live, that was phenomenal. I think that was great to actually be able to see the real artwork live and and interact, right?
Yeah. So we're going to try to do more of that. All right. So this week we're going to feature art of the fabric through Tapestries and Quilts, and this is actually in support of our keynote speaker today. So for millennia, fabrics have been a means to tell the story of human civilization and become a fine art beyond just the latest fashions. Today, Sarah will give us a quick history of fabric art, the Middle Ages, Renaissance, the American Civil War, and 911, and we'll be covering a couple of those different media today. So let's see if we can highlight Sarah. Hey, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Happy 2021. It's good to see you all again.
Happy New Year.
Good to have you back.
Happy New Year. Yes. So today we are talking about tapestries and quilts. So we'll start with tapestry. So tapestry is an artistic form using textiles that are woven together to create different images. So most people kind of have a general understanding of what a tapestry maybe looks like. But if we break it down even further, there are two types of weaving threads, weft and warp. So classical tapestry is called weft-facing weaving, which essentially means there's a big loom of warp threads, which are these kind of longitudinal threads, as you see behind me. These are the warp threads. And the weft threads are hand woven in between the warp threads to create the image intended by the artist. So with tapestry, the warp threads are not seen in the final product. The weft threads are kind of weaved around them to create the image. And so most weavers use a natural thread like wool or linen for the warp threads, and the weft threads are usually wool or cotton, sometimes with the addition of silk or even gold. So this tapestry is part of the Unicorn series from the late Middle Ages in France. It's part of a series of 7 tapestries that are now at the Cloisters in New York, which is a museum run by the Met that specializes in medieval European art. So this particular tapestry is called The Unicorn is Found, and it's unknown what order the series of 7 are meant to be in. These tapestries were looted during the French Revolution and recovered in someone's barn in the 1850s. So because of this, there's not a ton known about who made these tapestries and kind of the meaning behind them. But this one depicts a group of noblemen hunting for a unicorn in the idyllic French countryside. And these tapestries were woven in wool with the addition of silk and gold. So here's another one in the same series. This is called The Unicorn is in Captivity and No Longer Dead. And it is speculated that Queen Anne of Brittany had them commissioned to celebrate her marriage to King Louis VII in 1499. But again, because of the history of these tapestries being stolen, there is much left to speculation. So a couple weeks back, you all learned more in depth about the Bayeux Tapestry with Nicholas Lloyd. So I'll just give it a little review. So technically speaking, the Bayeux Tapestry is an embroidery, not a tapestry, meaning that the images are stitched onto a piece of cloth rather than weaved together. And some art historians have even begun to call it the Bayeux embroidery. And so it depicts the Norman conquest of England and tells the story through the eyes of the Normans, but it's kind of been agreed upon through research that the tapestry itself was made in England. So it is made from wool that has been stitched onto a plain linen background. And the entire tapestry was made in 9 different panels that were then stitched together to form the 224-foot long piece. And considering how old it is and how remarkably large it is, it's quite remarkable that the Bayeux Tapestry has been kept in such good condition as it is today. So if we move on to quilting, so quilting, as opposed to tapestry making, is sewing and combining different layers of fabric and textiles together instead of tapestries, which is kind of more weaving. So with quilting, there are at least 3 layers needed for it to be considered a quilt. There's the top quilt, the batting or the padding, and the backing. And so the stitching on the padded fabric creates different designs and effects. And just like with tapestry, with quilting, there's the ability to embellish using pearls, beads, buttons, different things like that. So the quilt you're looking at is the National Memorial Quilt for 9/11, and it's on view at the 9/11 Memorial Museum in New York. And this quilt was made by 4 women from Pennsylvania that called themselves the Steel Quilters. And they had the undertaking of gathering quilt squares from all 50 states, including Canada, Spain, Denmark, and Australia. So the quilt depicts the Twin Towers in the center with the New York City skyline surrounding it. And on either side, it also pays tribute to the victims of the 4 flights and the victims at the Pentagon. And each 3-inch square on this quilt has the name of one person who lost their life in the 9/11 attacks. They even created a grid system to go along with it so that each name can be located on the quilt. And in total, the quilt is 8 feet high, 30 feet long, and contains almost 3,500 quilt squares. So quilting in the African American community dates back to slavery and slaves making quilts for both themselves and their owners. But I want to talk and focus on Harriet Powers. She was a former slave that exhibited her quilts after being freed. And this is her first ever exhibited quilt. It's called Bible Quilt, and she exhibited it at the Athens, Georgia Cotton Fair in 1886. And Powers taught herself how to read and learned the different stories of the Bible, and Christianity became something that was central to her quilting identity. Her style, as you can see, has both African and African-American influences, and is made from 266 pieces sewn together into 11 panels. And, it is thought by some scholars and historians that during the Civil War, slaves used special quilting patterns to communicate to each other about how to escape using the Underground Railroad, or that special quilts were hung on the outside of safe houses so that people using the Underground Railroad knew where to go. And there are books that discuss this idea, such as Stitched from the Soul and Hidden in Plain View. But I will say that this idea is a controversial idea, and it is disputed by other historians. So quilting and tapestry really are amazing forms of expression and art that have such a rich history in the US, but almost every other culture has some history of tapestry or embroidery or quilting. And it really takes, not only creativity, but a lot of technical proficiency as well. The idea of kind of taking these smaller pieces, these fabrics of one thing and combining it to become another to tell a story through textiles is really unique and amazing. So here's a little intro on quilting and tapestry, and I believe you're having a talk about the textile exchange after this. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah. Do we have any questions?
Hey, AJ, just to jump in briefly, when I lived in the UK a couple of months ago, there was an exhibit. We went to a tapestry exhibit, and it was really fascinating because as one of the parts of the exhibit, they had this company in the UK that takes these gigantic tapestries that are like 20 by 30 and they're just gigantic, lays them flat. And this is for the engineers in the crowd, puts them in this machine flat. It has a solution that they push through it, and they suck a vacuum from the other side, and they clean these giant tapestries, and they're priceless tapestries. So the process is really fascinating. But I just wanted to share that if you ever get a chance, if you're an engineer, and I know there's a couple of them out there, look for this thing because it's pretty fascinating. Just wanted to relay that.
Wow, very cool. Thank you for sharing that, Dave. Much appreciated.
Hey, Jay, I'll add, for the tapestries, for all of you in California, if you have the chance to go to the Hearst Castle, there are some absolutely amazing tapestries that are hung around the area as part of his collection, and they're enormous and hanging in the living areas and the dens and things. It's pretty amazing to see.
If you haven't seen those, it's definitely worth the trip up the coast.
And the castle itself is quite fascinating, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I guess, has anybody seen the unicorn tapestries?
I've seen a couple. This is Carol Hubbard in the Cluny Museum in Paris, which right now, of course, with COVID, none of us are doing much traveling. But I was there probably 10 years ago, and they're fabulous. Just huge tapestries. It's incredible to me that women spent that much time embroidering on these things.
An incredible form.
Yeah, gorgeous.
And if you're on the East Coast, the Biltmore Estate's a good source for big houses and tapestries.
Mhm.
And
The
Sarah,
cloisters,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
the cloisters are great.
The cloisters. Yes. Yes. New York. Yeah. Yeah. And Sarah, where is that 911 tapestry?
It is in the Memorial Museum in New York City.
New York City. Okay.
Yeah.
I wonder, is it open to the public?
It is open. They're open with, obviously specific COVID guidelines right now.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Definitely would be
Very neat.
worthwhile seeing. I think you mentioned something like 3,500 individual quilt tiles in there. Is that right?
Yes, 3,500, almost 3,500 3-inch quilt tiles. So
Wow.
it took them a very long time.
There's a Game of Thrones tapestry as well. It's very impressive. Yeah.
On the show.
Well, actually,
Oh,
they really created a
They really
tapestry.
created one.
Yeah.
Okay. Their own version of the Bayou Tapestry, perhaps.
Yeah. It's it's got that whole theme of the show.
Well, thank you for kicking off the year with a fascinating art talk, Sarah. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
We'll
Thanks, everyone.
look forward to hearing from you next week. Please stay on if you can. So
Great.
great. Thanks,
Thanks,
Sarah.
everyone.